The night pressed heavily against the ranch house, thick with wind and the smell of wet earth. Caleb woke suddenly, not from sound but from instinct, the kind earned by years of living alone, where danger rarely announced itself. Before he could sit up, he felt the mattress dip beside him, warmth, a human presence. His muscles locked, breath caught in his chest. But he did not reach for the rifle under the bed. She lay there close but not touching, her breathing uneven, as if she had crossed a great distance to reach this moment. Moonlight slipped through the thin curtains, enough for him to see the dark fall of her hair and the pale line of her shoulder. She wore almost nothing, only a loose wrap that seemed chosen more for necessity than intent. There was no flirtation in her posture, no invitation. Instead, there was urgency, fear carefully disguised as calm. "Naya," he whispered. She answered just as softly. "Do not speak loudly." His heart hammered, questions crowding his mind. But something in her voice held him still. Weeks ago, he had found her near the canyon, wounded and stubbornly silent, refusing help until she collapsed. She was Apache, proud, guarded, and carrying something heavy behind her eyes. Since then, she had stayed on the ranch, helping where she could, speaking little, watching everything. "This is an Apache way," she said after a moment. "A ritual." "A ritual for what?" he asked. She turned her face toward him but kept her eyes on the ceiling. "To ask protection, to bind a promise without forcing it. If you move me away, it is refused." Caleb swallowed. Every instinct told him the situation was dangerous, misunderstood and complicated beyond reason. Yet beneath that was another instinct, older, quieter, telling him she was not here to tempt or trap him. She was asking for safety in the only language she trusted. Outside, far off, he heard the faint echo of hooves, or perhaps imagined it. The land had been restless lately. Strangers passed more often. Questions were being asked. He stayed silent. Minutes stretched, then longer. Her breathing slowly eased, tension leaving her body like a held breath finally released. Just before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you." When dawn broke, cold and pale, Caleb woke alone. The bed was empty, the house quiet. For a moment he wondered if he had dreamed it all. Then he saw it on the pillow beside him, an eagle feather placed with care. He picked it up, knowing with certainty that whatever had begun that night was not finished, and that his silence had already chosen a side. Morning light filled the ranch yard with a thin, colorless glow, and Caleb moved through his chores with a restless mind. The events of the night clung to him like dust that wouldn't shake free. Naya worked near the corral, mending a broken latch, her movements steady and precise. She did not look at him. If not for the eagle feather still tucked into his pocket, he might have believed the whole thing imagined. By noon, he could stand the silence no longer. He found her by the water trough, washing her hands, the cold making her fingers red. "You came to my room," he said, keeping his voice low. "If that meant something, I need to understand it." She did not turn right away. When she finally did, her face held no shame, only resolve. "Understanding comes after," she replied. "Not before." That answer stirred irritation, but also curiosity. She explained that among her people, silence could carry a promise stronger than words. The ritual was not about closeness of bodies, but closeness of intent. By staying still, by not touching or demanding explanation, he had agreed to protect her, whether he realized it or not. Caleb frowned. "Protect you from what?" Her eyes drifted toward the open land beyond the fence. "Men who lie with papers and guns," she said. "Men who took something and killed to keep it." She told him then about her father, a messenger who carried knowledge between tribes, a man who discovered a plan to strip Apache land through false claims and forged signatures. When he tried to expose it, he vanished. She had been there the night he was taken. She had seen faces, heard names. "They think I know nothing," she said. "But they are wrong." The weight of it settled heavily in Caleb's chest. Harboring her was no longer an act of kindness. It was defiance. He thought of the strangers passing through lately, the way they studied his land too closely, asked too many polite questions. "If they come here," he said slowly, "they won't stop at you." "I know," she replied. "That is why the ritual matters. It gives you a choice." He looked at her then, truly looked, and saw the courage beneath the quiet. "Seems I already made it." That night, as the sun sank red behind the hills, unease crept over the ranch. A distant shout carried on the wind. Naya stepped closer to the house, her hand tightening around the small knife at her belt. "They are near," she said. Caleb checked his rifle and locked the doors, fully aware that silence had bound him to a path he could no longer walk away from. The riders arrived just after sunrise, their silhouettes cutting across the open land like dark marks on a clean page. Caleb watched from the porch, the coffee in his hand long gone cold. 3 men dismounted at the fence line, deliberate and unhurried, the kind who wanted to be noticed. Their smiles were practiced, their eyes sharp. Naya stood inside the house, visible only as a reflection in the window. She said nothing, but her presence pressed against Caleb's back like a warning. One of the men stepped forward, flashing a badge that caught the light. "Morning. We're asking a few questions. You seen an Apache woman pass through here?" Caleb shrugged. "Plenty of folks pass through. Hard to keep track." The man's smile tightened. He asked about travelers, about strangers, about how long Caleb had owned the ranch. Each question circled closer, probing for a crack. Another man wandered toward the barn, pretending interest in the horses while checking every shadow. Inside, Naya listened. Every word. She knew these men, not their names, but their intent. They were not law, not really. They were hired silence. When the leader mentioned her father, Caleb felt it like a punch. "A man like that," the rider said casually, "tends to stir up trouble." Caleb met his gaze and held it. Sounds like trouble followed him. The pause that followed was dangerous. The men weighed him then, not as a rancher, but as an obstacle. At last, the leader nodded. "If she shows up," he said, "you'll let us know." They rode off, dust rising behind them, but the threat lingered long after the sound faded. That night, Naya sat across from Caleb at the table, the lamp casting deep shadows. She spoke at last, her voice steady but stripped bare of pretense. She told him how her father had uncovered documents meant to erase her, people's claim, how powerful men needed witnesses gone. She had memorized everything because paper could burn, but memory could not. "They will not stop," she said. "Staying here will bring fire." Caleb stared at the table, then stood and began packing supplies without a word. Saddlebags, water, ammunition. His movements were calm, final. "We leave before dawn," he said. "High ground. Places they won't follow easy." She watched him, surprise softening into something like gratitude. When she reached for his hand, it was brief, respectful, but it said more than words ever could. Outside, the land lay silent under the stars, but both of them knew the silence was about to break. They rode through the night, keeping to narrow paths where the land rose sharp and unforgiving. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. By dawn they reached the high mesas, where ancient stones stood scattered like the remains of forgotten prayers. The air was thinner there, colder, and every sound carried far. Caleb slowed the horses, knowing this was as good a place as any to make a stand. Naya dismounted first. She knelt, pressing her palm to the earth, eyes closed. When she rose, there was a calm about her that hadn't been there before, as if fear had finally loosened its grip. She told him this land was older than lies. The truth spoken here carried weight. From her pack she took a small bundle, sage, a strip of cloth, and the eagle feather she had left behind. "This is where the ritual ends," she said. "Not in a bed, not in silence alone, but in choice." She burned the sage, letting the smoke drift into the wind, and spoke the names she had kept hidden for so long. She recited what her father had learned, every detail, every betrayal, trusting the land and the man beside her to hold it. Caleb listened, committing it all to memory, understanding now that silence was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to protect the truth until it was strong enough to stand. They were not followed. Word traveled faster than horses sometimes, and within weeks the story reached the right ears. The false claims unraveled, papers surfaced. Men who relied on shadows found themselves exposed to daylight. Caleb returned to his ranch alone, carrying copies of affidavits and sworn statements that would finish what Naya's father had begun. Naya went back to her people. She was no longer hunted, no longer hiding. When she left, she stood in the doorway of the ranch house, the same place where everything had quietly begun. The morning was bright, honest. "You listened when it mattered," she said. "That is rare." Caleb nodded. "You trusted me first." She smiled then, small but real, and pressed the eagle feather into his hand. "Some bonds are not meant to be broken," she said. "Only understood." As she rode away, Caleb felt the land settle, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, one earned through courage, through restraint, through knowing when silence must end and truth must finally be spoken.